thanks so much.
Right.
Everyone in the audience will know who Peter Goadsby is, so we're going to pick his brain because I think he's been such a success. We can learn a lot from your career. So starting at the beginning, in your early career, were mentors important to you? And if so, for the juniors watching, how would you suggest they go about finding their people in the International Headache Society?
Mentorship's been crucial in my career. I don't even think I'd be in medicine if it wasn't for mentoring. I met Jim Lance. Well, I didn't meet him. I first saw him talk when I was in second year medicine, and I wasn't in love with it, I have to say that. But he had a way of describing things and a way of making a clinical problem interesting at a really understanding level. And so I sought him out, and he mentored me and advised me on just about everything. I've said it before in public, and I'll say it again, that it's no accident that my firstborn son's name's James. That was not an accident, I have to say. So mentorship's been crucial. And how do you do that? You have to find someone you can get on with, someone you look up to, someone who you admire for something that you aspire to. And you need to find, at some level, I think a kind person helps. Jim was always kind and polite, and had almost a perfect mentor in that way. And I think when you're looking around for a mentor, look around for someone who's not too old, because you need because you're going to take a while to get things done, and look around for someone who it gels, who it works with, I think.
So it must have been hard to leave Australia in ways. What drove that? Was it because of any inequities compared to other countries?
Well, it was hard and it was easy, in the sense it was all about research funding. It was difficult to get funding to do research in Australia. And I come to the conclusion that one of the things I wanted to do was really pursue an academic research-driven career. And in the last year I was in Australia, almost all the funds I had were coming from outside of Australia into Australia, and I sort of thought to myself, this doesn't make any sense. And the opportunity came up to apply for things in the UK. So it really was about following the resources to be able to do the things that I wanted to do.
And I think your flexibility to be on different continents at the right time for different clinical and research purposes has really driven things further forward, as well as your networking. So with your research, I'm so interested, what has been the things that you've learned that have driven your research questions? Like, where have you taken your research ideas from, other than, trying to do animal models initially?
Yeah.
Do you learn much from your patients about what needs to be done?
Oh yes, you learn things in both ways. As an example, and it, interesting enough, comes to fruition at this meeting. A patient I came across a long time ago, and some more recently. One a long time ago, who had prominent migraine aura without headache, but also had cranial autonomic symptoms. And I'd thought trigeminal activation, cranial autonomic symptoms, and this lady didn't have much in the way of headache, and it makes you think, why is that? And so you start to think about the connection, you start to think about what's going on, and what I came to the conclusion was that if the cranial autonomic pathway is some part of a protective reflex, that actually you might predict that people with aura are more likely to have those symptoms. Well, fast forward 20 years, and we have a nice poster at the Soul meeting this year, which actually shows that. So you get that sort of inspiration, and then you try. I think patients keep you honest in the sense that if something doesn't make sense, it just doesn't make sense. I'll give you another example. The idea that aura drives headache, and that there's some silent aura which is driving headache, this doesn't make any sense, because people who don't have aura, well, they just don't have aura, and they don't have it the whole of their life, and there's millions of them. So trying to shoehorn a really nice, neat laboratory concept into the clinic, if it doesn't work, it really teaches you just have to go back and think about things again. Cluster headache. I was struck, to say I was almost struck down by the first person I saw with an acute cluster headache, and when I was starting to do those studies, and it really gives you a shiver up the spine to see those people. And I remember initially thinking to yourself, wow, we need to do something about this. This is really important. One of the other things that came along from patients, again, the cranial autonomic symptoms, we were first taking that and doing the laboratory work. One of the people, I was presenting a seminar, and an anatomist said of this pathway that it doesn't exist because it's not being described.
Yes.
And Jim Lance got up and said, well, now it's been described. He taught me, you've got to have a flexible mind. You've got to be careful about what you do, careful methodologically, but you do have to be flexible because many things that are written, they're just wrong, or they don't quite cover all the possibilities. Still, every time you go to clinic, someone will say something and you think to yourself, okay, I can't really explain that, and that tells me that I've got more work to do. I find that very grounding.
Yeah. And speaking of learning from your patients, are you learning in reverse now that you see the super responders to the CGRP monoclonal antibodies about what matters to them, what makes it so debilitating, having a migraine versus a tension type headache?
Yes. You see the complete responders, and even the people who are 75% better and doing really well, and they talk about something which I take for granted, which is feeling normal, clear. They talk about the brain fog being gone. They talk about not having to worry about, of course, having the headache. But it really reinforces me the importance of many of the symptoms that we haven't asked about, say concentration difficulties, which is like a 4 out of 5 yes at least. And we haven't really thought enough about it, understood its disability implication. But the monoclonals, the CGRPs altogether, for the patients who do well, they just do really, really well. Because hitherto, some of our preventives have done all right, but they produce side effects. So it was a bit difficult to get that really great feeling. And when people started saying to me, you know, I feel normal, I thought, wow, everyone should feel normal. That seems perfectly reasonable. And it's quite education to think about all the things that we probably have missed in terms of the impact of the disorder.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I've really enjoyed is the way you move things forward constantly by thinking about it and rethinking about it. So as an example, it's a few years ago, but you wrote a review on cluster headache, and in grey you had the nice little diagram of things that possibly should be phased out because the side effects outweighed the benefits or the proven benefits. And as you've said, evidence lacking doesn't mean it doesn't exist, it just hasn't been done properly. But we certainly have looked at prednisone in cluster headache, and there's probably better things now. So yeah, I think that's a good lesson for everyone to move forwards and to keep rethinking rather than sticking to the dogma that we learn, because we're just humans trying to explain things in science, and they're obviously oversimplified.
And it's no criticism of what we've done. I mean, I hope it's no criticism of what we've done in the past, because you do the best you can do, and we genuinely want to improve people's lives. But when you see a better way of doing it, you don't hang on to the old ideas.
Yeah.
You've got to move forward. You can't throw everything, all the toys out at the same time. But I do think progress is about constantly reevaluating whether is what you're doing normally, is that really good enough? And if it's not good enough, well, it's okay to move on. It's just not okay to ignore the possibility of improvement.
Yeah, so some people are researchers, some people are clinicians, you happen to be a bit of everything, but other people are organisers, and organised care certainly seems to improve outcomes. So you were very important in the first Australian Headache Society. So what would be your advice for starting societies in the smaller or less fortunate economic nations that haven't yet got organised care? How did you get that moving on, you know, the sniff of an oil rag?
Well, I don't know that was that important. I did what Jim Lance asked me to do.
Excellent.
So
do what your senior says to do. Very good advice to start with.
Yes, that was a marker of success. Paul Spira did a lot in the initial organisation of the Australian Headache Society. So I think you have to identify, if you want to start a society, you've got to identify a person who can be like a figurehead. You need a president who's got some credibility. And fortunately, Jim was a great headache doctor, and he had genuine neurology credibility. So he's the right person to start it off. So you need that head person, I think.
Yeah. So I have a problem whenever I introduce you at a meeting because you've done too much. So shortlist. What would you say your greatest achievement or achievements are?
Oh, the greatest achievement it's easy to say. It's the 86 odd people that fellows and trainees who've come through the group, and I see them at the meeting and they're chairing things and they're giving talks and they're establishing their own groups. They're established people in their own country and leaders in their own country. And I look at that and I think to myself, a lot of good is being done. And that's the thing I learned from Lance, that you can do things yourself and that's nice, but if you train people and they go on to do more, then you can take some credit for the general achievement of all. So I think that it's been the ability to be able to create an environment where I could train people and they would be successful and happy.
Yeah, I think that is a huge achievement actually, which is quite great for you to say based on having the Brain Prize and got CGRP with a group of people to be such a therapeutic target. So the reverse of that is, what do you think are the remaining gaps in headache that you see moving forward?
I think there are a few gaps. One of the gaps is a little bit to sort out our classification systems. Why I've taken on the chairmanship of the classification committee. I think there are some issues which actually impede clinical practice and impede our ability to teach others in a simple way to get on with what's going on, with what's happening. And I'd like, over the next couple of years, working with the committee to try and tidy up some things. It's a great system and it's been very useful, but it has some little areas where we could make change. So I'd really like to do that, and I'd like to do it in places where I think they'll have real practical clinical impact. I'd like to work out what I really would like to work out what's special about indomethacin. I would like die to do that.
I would like you to do that too.
I would love to do that because that's dreadful. I think it's high time that cluster headache got more therapeutic attention, because it's been a little bit the poor cousin of migraine, because it's only 0.1% of the population instead of 15% of the population, and that needs some thought. And we'll never, well, in my lifetime, we're not going to see a situation where we're satisfied with everything we have in terms of migraine therapy, and the CGRPs have been great and that's fantastic, and there are a group of people who are perfectly happy. And we need to be thinking about the next sort of things that are going to be done, because I guess I'm happy with what's happened, but I'm just not satisfied. I'm not satisfied that we know enough. I'm not satisfied that we do enough or that we teach enough people.
So I think the take-home points are: grab a mentor, be flexible, and don't be too satisfied. Keep moving forwards. One final question. For nations or people in the situation where healthcare utilisation for headache is lower, what are your key messages for getting a headache service or those sorts of things happening? You gave great advice to me in Australia, and we got a meeting with the bureaucrats when we talked in their language. So how would you see that happening in countries that aren't the UK, for instance, of getting a formal headache clinic happening?
Well, it's about making the argument about cost to whoever has the purse strings, and then making it in a palatable way. So that usually means if you can convince them on cost, then you need to be thinking a little bit about infrastructure. On the first day, don't think about too many doctors, think about more nurses. Because the more headache nurses you train, the more general utility the more you'll be able to do. So I think it's marrying, give the bureaucrats the problem and a solution which is cost effective, and as you're successful, it will grow.
Yeah, good advice. Fantastic.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I mean, I think that's the summation of how to be a successful neurologist in headache. So if we can all do half of what you do, or an eighth of what you do, it'll be a better world.
You're very generous.
No, I'm not. You're very busy. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.